The blood-curdling scream tore through the warm summer air of Willow Springs, Texas, like a knife through butter. As Olivia Montgomery was dragged toward the church altar by her father's hired men, her white wedding dress catching dust and tearing at the seams. It was 1875, and Olivia had just turned 22, with dreams far bigger than marriage to Harold Blackman, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation as cruel as the scorching Texas sun. Harold stood at the altar, his gray mustache twitching with impatience, his fingers drumming against his expensive suit as he watched his reluctant bride approach. "Let me go," Olivia shouted, her honey blonde hair falling from its carefully arranged pins as she struggled against the iron grip of the two men dragging her forward. "I won't marry him. You can't make me." But her protests fell on deaf ears. Her father, Thomas Montgomery, a cattle baron who'd lost his fortune to gambling and poor investments, stood beside Harold, his face set in grim determination. This marriage would save their family from financial ruin, and he cared little for his daughter's happiness when weighed against his own reputation. The small church was filled with the wealthiest families of the county, all watching with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination as the bride fought against her fate. The pastor looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he clutched his Bible to his chest. "Get her up here," Harold commanded, his voice carrying across the church. "I paid good money for this wedding, and I aim to get what I purchased." Just as the men reached the steps to the altar, the heavy wooden doors of the church burst open with a thunderous crash. The afternoon sunlight silhouetted a tall figure on horseback, the animal's hooves clattering against the wooden floor of the church entrance. "I believe the lady said no," came a deep, resonant voice as the rider urged his horse forward into the church, causing gasps to ripple through the congregation. Preston Vaughn sat tall in the saddle, his black Stetson pulled low over piercing blue eyes, his face weathered from years under the western sun. A revolver rested on each hip, and determination set his jaw as he guided his Palomino stallion down the aisle, scattering flower petals and sending the wedding guests pressing back against the pews. Olivia's heart nearly stopped at the sight of him. Preston Vaughn, the man she'd loved since she was 16, the cowboy her father had run off their property 3 years ago with threats and shotgun blasts when he'd caught them together behind the stables. "Vaughn!" Thomas Montgomery bellowed, his face turning crimson with rage. "Get out of my daughter's wedding before I have you shot." Preston's eyes never left Olivia's face. "Are you marrying this man of your own free will, Miss Montgomery?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her voice finding strength. "No, they're forcing me. Please, Preston." That was all he needed to hear. In one fluid motion, Preston urged his horse forward, leaned down, and extended his arm. "Then I reckon it's time we leave." "Stop him!" Harold Blackman roared, reaching for the pistol hidden beneath his coat, but Preston was faster. Without drawing his own weapon, he kicked out at the men holding Olivia, sending them stumbling backward. In the moment of confusion, he grasped Olivia's outstretched hand and swung her up onto the saddle in front of him. "Hold on tight," he whispered in her ear as she clutched at the horse's mane. The first gunshot rang out as Preston wheeled the horse around, Olivia gasping as the bullet splintered wood just inches from them. Preston spurred the Palomino forward, and the powerful animal leaped down the aisle, sending wedding guests diving for cover. More shots followed them as they burst through the church doors and out into the blazing Texas sun. Preston kept his body curved protectively around Olivia as they galloped down the main street of Willow Springs, her wedding dress billowing behind them like a white flag of surrender. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the thundering hooves and the distant shouts behind them. "Anywhere that's not here," Preston called back, guiding the horse toward the open country beyond the town. "I've got a place in mind, but we need to keep riding." Olivia glanced back to see several riders emerging from the church, led by her father and Harold Blackman. "They're coming after us." "They won't catch us," Preston assured her, urging the horse to an even faster pace. "Maverick here is the fastest horse in 3 counties. As they raced across the open plains, the wedding church and Willow Springs growing smaller behind them, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years' freedom. The wind tore at her elaborate hairstyle, sending pins flying and her blonde locks streaming behind her. Despite the danger, despite not knowing what would come next, she found herself laughing out loud, the sound carrying across the endless Texas landscape. Preston's arm tightened around her waist. "I've missed that sound," he said, his voice close to her ear. "I thought I'd never see you again," she admitted, turning slightly to look at his face. The years had changed him, his jaw more defined, his eyes holding more wisdom. But he was still her Preston, the cowboy who'd taught her to ride bareback and shown her the beauty of watching the sun rise over the prairie. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he responded, a smile breaking across his tanned face. "Not when I heard they were forcing you to marry that old snake Blackman. How did you know? News travels fast, even to the territories. When I heard what was happening, I rode for 3 days straight to get here." The sound of pursuit was growing fainter, but Preston didn't slow their pace. They rode until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Only then did Preston guide the horse toward a thick copse of trees alongside a narrow stream. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, sliding from the saddle and reaching up to help Olivia down. Her legs nearly buckled when she touched the ground, unused to such hard riding. Preston caught her before she could fall, his hands strong and sure on her waist. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her wedding dress. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "I should have come back for you sooner." Olivia shook her head. "My father would have killed you. He made it clear what would happen if you ever set foot on Montgomery land again." Preston led the horse to the stream to drink, then untied a small pack from behind the saddle. "I've got some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a wedding feast, I'm afraid." Olivia laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "It's better than anything they would have served at that wedding." They sat side by side on a fallen log, eating in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. Olivia's wedding dress was torn and dirty now, the pristine white fabric stained with dust and sweat. "What happened?" she finally asked. "After my father ran you off?" Preston's jaw tightened. "I went north to Wyoming Territory, worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny I could. I was planning to come back for you once I had enough to offer you a proper life." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "I never stopped thinking about you, Olivia." "Not for a single day. I waited for you," she admitted. "Every night I'd look out my window hoping to see you riding up to the house, but when months turned to years. I'm sorry it took so long." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "But I'm here now, and I swear I won't leave you again." "My father won't give up easily," Olivia warned. "Harold Blackman even less so. They'll hunt us down." Preston nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we're heading to New Mexico Territory. I've got land there, a small ranch I've been building. It's not much yet, but it could be a home. For us." The word "us" hung in the air between them, filled with promise and possibility. Olivia looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You still want me after all this time?" Instead of answering with words, Preston leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle kiss that quickly deepened with years of longing. Olivia's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, drawing him closer as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Does that answer your question?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "It's a start," she replied, her own lips curving upward, "but I might need more convincing." The sound of distant hoofbeats brought them both to attention, the moment shattered. Preston was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to his revolver. "They've followed our trail," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move." Quickly, they gathered their meager supplies and remounted the Palomino. This time, Preston led them into the stream, riding in the water to hide their tracks. They traveled by moonlight, the landscape silvery and otherworldly around them. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead," Preston told her as they rode. "We can rest there for the night, then continue at first light." The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, dusty and abandoned, but to Olivia, it looked like a palace after their harrowing escape and long ride. Preston unsaddled the horse and rubbed him down while Olivia explored the small space, finding an old bed frame with a straw-filled mattress and a rough wooden table with a single chair. "It's not much," Preston said apologetically as he entered, carrying their supplies. "It's perfect," Olivia assured him, sinking onto the edge of the bed, her body aching from the unaccustomed riding. She looked down at her ruined wedding dress and laughed. "Though I wish I had something else to wear." Preston opened his saddlebags and pulled out a simple cotton shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're clean." Olivia took the offered clothes with a grateful smile. "Turn around," she instructed, and Preston obliged, facing the wall as she struggled out of the elaborate wedding gown. The buttons down the back were almost impossible to reach, and after a moment of frustration, she sighed. "I need help with these buttons." Preston turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers before dropping to the row of tiny pearl buttons running down her spine. With surprisingly gentle fingers for a cowboy, he began unfastening them one by one. Olivia felt her skin warm beneath his touch, her breath catching as his knuckles brushed against her bare back. When the dress was loosened enough, she clutched it to her front. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. Preston cleared his throat. "I'll go check on Maverick," he said, his own voice rough as he hurried outside. Alone, Olivia quickly changed into Preston's clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. The fabric smelled like him, like leather and sun-warmed cotton, and something uniquely Preston. She used a strip torn from her wedding dress to belt the trousers around her waist, then bundled up what remained of the gown. She wouldn't need it anymore. When Preston returned, he paused in the doorway, his eyes taking in the sight of her in his clothes. "You look more beautiful now than you did in that fancy dress," he said simply. Olivia felt herself blush. "Liar," she said with a smile. "I look like a child playing dress-up." "You look like a woman who knows her own mind," he corrected, crossing to the small fireplace and building a fire with practiced efficiency. "A woman brave enough to run from a forced marriage and ride across Texas with a wanted man." Olivia's eyes widened. "Wanted? What do you mean?" Preston didn't look up from his task as he struck a match. "Your father didn't just run me off 3 years ago, Olivia. He accused me of stealing horses, a hanging offense. There's been a bounty on my head in Willow County ever since. But that's a lie." Olivia exclaimed, anger flaring bright and hot. "You never stole anything." "It was his way of making sure I couldn't come back for you," Preston explained, the fire catching and sending shadows dancing across the walls of the small cabin. If I'd returned to Willow Springs before today, I'd have been arrested on sight. Yet you came anyway, Olivia said softly, understanding the risk he had taken for her. Preston finally looked up, the firelight illuminating his face. Some things are worth risking everything for. They shared the rest of Preston's provisions for dinner, sitting close by the fire as the night deepened around them. Outside, the palomino nickered softly, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Tell me about your ranch," Olivia asked, leaning her head against Preston's shoulder. His arm circled her waist, drawing her closer. "It's in a valley with a year-round creek running through it. Good water, good grass. I've built a small cabin better than this place, with real glass in the windows. I've got about 50 head of cattle, mostly longhorns but some better breeds I'm crossbreeding." "It sounds wonderful," Olivia murmured, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. "It will be," Preston promised. "Once you're there to make it a home." They slept that night on the narrow bed, Preston's arms wrapped protectively around Olivia, both too exhausted for anything more than the comfort of each other's presence. The morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the cracks in the walls. They were on the move again before the sun had fully risen, Preston leading them on a circuitous route to avoid any possible pursuit. They traveled through rough country, places where Olivia had never been, far from the civilized confines of Willow Springs and her father's ranch. "How much farther to New Mexico?" she asked on their third day of travel, as they paused to rest the horse in the shade of a sandstone outcropping. "About a week, if we keep a steady pace," Preston replied, offering her the canteen. "We'll need to stop in a small town soon to resupply. I know a place where we should be safe." The town of Dry Creek was little more than a dusty street with a general store, a saloon, and a handful of weathered buildings. Preston left Olivia with the horse behind the store while he went in to purchase supplies, not wanting to risk her being recognized. "Stay out of sight," he warned. "I'll be quick." Olivia waited anxiously, jumping at every sound, until Preston returned with saddlebags full of provisions and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" she asked as they rode out of town, heading west once more. Preston handed her the package with a smile. "Open it and see." Inside was a simple dress of blue cotton, not fancy but clean and new, along with a comb and a bar of lavender soap. "I thought you might want something of your own to wear," he explained, suddenly looking self-conscious. "The shopkeeper's wife helped me pick it out." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you," she said, clutching the package to her chest. "It's perfect." That night they camped by a small pond, and Olivia took the opportunity to bathe, washing away days of dust and worry with the lavender soap. She changed into the blue dress, which fit surprisingly well, and used the comb to untangle her long blonde hair. When she returned to their camp, Preston was tending the fire, but he looked up at her approach and froze, the stick in his hand forgotten. "You look like a dream," he said softly, rising to his feet. Olivia twirled, the skirt of the dress flaring around her ankles. "It's not silk or lace, but it's the most beautiful dress I've ever owned because it was chosen by you." Preston crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I've been wanting to ask you something," he said, his voice serious, "but I wasn't sure it was the right time." Olivia's heart began to race. "Ask me," she encouraged. Preston took a deep breath. "When we reach my ranch, would you consider becoming my wife? Not because you have to or because someone's forcing you, but because you want to, because you choose me." Olivia felt tears well in her eyes for the second time that day, but these were tears of joy. "I chose you 3 years ago, Preston Vaughn. Nothing has changed for me." His smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with delight. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that promised forever, his hands gentle on her face as if she were made of the finest porcelain. That night, beneath the vast canopy of Texas stars, they made love for the first time, their bodies coming together with the passion of years of separation and the tenderness of a love that had endured despite all obstacles. Afterward, Olivia lay in Preston's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never want to be apart from you again," she whispered. Preston's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "You won't be, I promise you that." But promises, no matter how sincere, are sometimes difficult to keep. 2 days later, as they crossed a shallow river, they heard the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching fast. "Riders coming," Preston said, his body tensing. "At least 5 of them." Olivia felt cold fear grip her heart. "My father," Preston nodded grimly. "Likely. We need to find cover." They urged Maverick up the riverbank and into a stand of cottonwoods, but before they could hide properly, the riders appeared on the ridge above them. Olivia recognized her father's foreman, Jim Barton, leading 4 hard-looking men she didn't know. "There they are," Barton shouted, pointing in their direction. Preston didn't hesitate. He spurred Maverick forward, racing across the open ground toward a rocky outcropping in the distance. Bullets whistled past them, one so close that Olivia felt the wind of its passing against her cheek. "Keep your head down," Preston shouted, leaning low over the horse's neck and pulling Olivia down with him. They reached the rocks just as Maverick stumbled, a bullet grazing his flank. The horse recovered quickly, but Preston knew they couldn't outrun the pursuit much longer. "We need to make a stand," he told Olivia as they dismantled behind the rocks. "I'll hold them off while you take Maverick and keep going west." "No," Olivia protested, gripping his arm. "I won't leave you." "Olivia, please," Preston urged, his eyes pleading. "I can't risk you getting hurt. If they capture you, they'll take you back to Blackman." "And if they capture you, they'll hang you," she countered. "We stay together." Before Preston could argue further, the riders were upon them. Barton's voice rang out. "Vaughn, send Miss Montgomery out and we might let you live," Preston called back, his voice steady. "She's not Miss Montgomery anymore, she's my wife." Olivia looked at him in surprise. They had spoken of marriage but hadn't yet exchanged vows. "In my heart, it's true," he whispered to her. Then louder to Barton. "We're heading to New Mexico territory and we're not coming back. Tell Montgomery to let his daughter go." "Those aren't our orders," Barton replied. "Mr. Blackman paid good money for that wedding and Mr. Montgomery owes him a bride. Send her out now or we start shooting." Preston checked his revolvers, making sure both were fully loaded. "Stay down," he instructed Olivia. "When I engage them, take Maverick and run." "I told you, I'm not leaving," she insisted. The first shot ricocheted off the rocks above their heads, showering them with stone chips. Preston returned fire, his aim true as one of Barton's men cried out in pain. What followed was a tense exchange of gunfire, Preston carefully conserving his ammunition while the pursuers seemed content to waste theirs. But it was 5 against 1, and eventually, Preston's luck would run out. The moment came when a bullet struck his left arm, causing him to drop one of his revolvers with a grunt of pain. Olivia tore a strip from her dress and quickly bound the wound, which was bleeding but not life-threatening. "We need a plan," she said, her mind racing. "They're between us and New Mexico." Preston nodded, his face pale from pain and exertion. "There's a canyon about a mile south of here. If we can reach it, there's a trail that's difficult to follow unless you know it's there." A lull in the shooting gave them their opportunity. Moving quickly, they mounted Maverick, Preston gritting his teeth against the pain in his arm, and rode hard for the canyon. using the rocky terrain to shield their escape. The canyon was, as Preston had described, a narrow slash in the earth with steep walls and a rocky floor. They descended carefully, Maverick picking his way down a nearly invisible trail that wound between massive boulders. Behind them, they could hear Barton and his men shouting in frustration as they lost the trail. "They won't find this path easily," Preston assured Olivia as they reached the canyon floor. "And even if they do, we'll hear them coming long before they reach us." They followed the canyon for several miles, the walls rising high on either side, until it opened into a hidden valley, lush with grass and shaded by a grove of ancient oak trees. A clear spring bubbled from the rocks, forming a small pool before continuing on as a stream. "We can rest here," Preston said, easing himself from the saddle with a wince. "Let Maverick recover and check my arm properly." Olivia helped him remove his shirt, revealing the bullet wound a clean furrow across his bicep. She washed it carefully with water from the spring, then rebandaged it with strips cut from the bottom of her dress. "You'd make a good doctor," Preston commented, watching her work with steady hands. "My mother taught me," Olivia replied, securing the bandage. "She always said a woman should know how to tend wounds out here in the West." They made camp beneath the oaks, building a small fire and sharing the last of their provisions. The sun set behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in brilliant hues before darkness fell. "Do you think they'll give up?" Olivia asked as they sat side by side watching the flames. Preston sighed. "Not your father, not Blackman, but they can't search forever. Once we reach New Mexico, we'll be beyond their reach. And if they follow us there, then we'll keep moving," Preston said simply. "North to Colorado or west to California if necessary, wherever we need to go to be safe." Olivia leaned against him, careful of his injured arm. "As long as we're together, I don't care where we go." They spent 2 days in the hidden valley, allowing Preston's arm to heal and Maverick to regain his strength. On the morning of the 3rd day, they continued their journey, following the canyon until it rejoined the main trail west, now well ahead of their pursuers. The landscape began to change as they crossed into New Mexico territory, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and distant mesas. The air was drier, the sky an impossible shade of blue that seemed to go on forever. "We're getting close," Preston told her as they crested a rise on the 7th day after their escape. "See that valley there? That's our land." Olivia followed his pointing finger, taking in the view of a green valley nestled between gentle hills. A small cabin stood near a creek, with corrals and a barn nearby. It wasn't grand like her father's ranch, but it was beautiful in its simplicity and the promise it held. "Our home," she said softly. Preston's arm tightened around her waist. "Our home," he agreed. They rode down into the valley as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land. As they approached the cabin, a man stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, before recognition dawned on his face. "Boss, you're back," he called, lowering the weapon and striding toward them. He was younger than Preston, perhaps 19 or 20, with a shock of red hair and freckles across his nose. "Patrick," Preston greeted him with a nod. "Everything all right while I was gone?" "Just fine," Patrick assured him, his curious gaze moving to Olivia. "Though we were starting to worry, you being gone longer than expected." Preston helped Olivia down from the horse before dismounting himself. "Patrick Dawson, meet Olivia Montgomery, my future wife." Patrick's eyebrows shot up, but he recovered quickly, removing his hat and offering Olivia a bow that was surprisingly graceful. "Madam, it's an honor." "Patrick helps me run the ranch," Preston explained to Olivia. "He and his brother Daniel handle things when I'm away." "It's lovely to meet you," Olivia said. smiling at the young man's obvious attempt at gentlemanly behavior. Patrick took charge of Maverick, leading the tired horse toward the barn while Preston escorted Olivia to the cabin. It was small but solid, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and a wooden table with chairs. A door led to a separate bedroom, simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror on the wall. "It's not what you're used to," Preston said, watching her face anxiously. Olivia turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "It's exactly what I've dreamed of." That night, after a simple but satisfying meal, Preston and Olivia sat on the porch of their cabin, watching as stars filled the vast New Mexico sky. Patrick and his brother Daniel had gone to their own small cabin nearby, leaving the couple alone. "Are you happy?" Preston asked, his fingers intertwined with Olivia's. She leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "Happier than I've ever been, but I'd be even happier as your wife." Preston turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Then let's not wait. The circuit preacher comes through town next Sunday. We could ride in, get married proper." "Yes," Olivia agreed without hesitation, "though I'll need a dress that isn't torn from bandaging wounds and riding across Texas." Preston laughed, pulling her close. "I'm sure we can find something suitable, though you could wear a gunny sack and still be the most beautiful bride in the territory." The following Sunday, in the small church in the nearby town of Cedar Creek, Preston and Olivia were married by a traveling preacher. Olivia wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton with lace trim at the collar and cuffs, her hair adorned with wildflowers that Preston had picked that morning. Preston wore his best shirt and a new vest, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Patrick and Daniel serving as witnesses along with a few townspeople who'd heard that the new rancher was getting married. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at the town's only restaurant, with music provided by a local fiddler and his son on the banjo. Preston and Olivia danced until their feet ached, their eyes never straying far from each other's faces. "Mrs. Vaughn," Preston murmured as they swayed to a slow melody. "How does it sound?" "Like music," Olivia replied, her arms around his neck. "The most beautiful name I could imagine." As the night deepened, they said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch, now truly their home together. Under the New Mexico stars, they renewed the promises they had made in church, their bodies joining as one in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. The months that followed were busy ones, as Olivia learned the rhythms of ranch life and made the cabin truly their own. She planted a garden, hung curtains at the windows, and filled the home with small touches that transformed it from a bachelor's quarters to a family home. Preston's herd grew, as did their prosperity. By the following spring, they had hired 2 more hands to help with the increasing workload, and Preston had begun construction on an addition to the cabin, another bedroom. He explained with a meaningful look that made Olivia blush. It was a year to the day after their wedding when Olivia shared the news she had suspected for several weeks. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the distant mesas in gold and crimson. "Preston," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that spread across his face was something Olivia knew she would remember until her dying day. Preston fell to his knees before her, pressing his lips to her stomach before looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our child." "The first of many, I hope," Olivia said, running her fingers through his hair. Preston rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms and spinning her in a circle that reminded her of that night by the campfire when he had first asked her to be his wife. "I love you, Olivia Vaughn," he declared, loud enough for the entire valley to hear. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "My cowboy who rode in and saved me from a fate worse than death." Their daughter was born the following winter, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden hair. They named her Hope, for she represented everything they had fought for and won together a future built on love rather than obligation, on choice rather than coercion. As Olivia nursed her daughter by the firelight, Preston sitting beside them with an arm around his wife's shoulders, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From being dragged to an altar to marry a man she despised, to finding true happiness with the man she had always loved, it seemed almost like a dream. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How close I came to missing all of this," Olivia answered honestly. "If you hadn't come for me that day, I would have found you somehow," Preston assured her. "Even if I had to search the whole country. We were meant to be together, Olivia. Nothing could have kept us apart forever." As if to punctuate his words, little Hope made a small sound of contentment, her tiny hand grasping her father's finger with surprising strength. "She's going to be as stubborn as her mother," Preston observed with a grin. "And as brave as her father," Olivia countered, leaning over to kiss him softly. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing their valley in pristine white. But inside the cabin, warmth and love created a sanctuary that no storm could touch, a home built on courage and devotion that would stand for generations to come. Over the years, the Vaughn ranch prospered and grew. Hope was joined by 2 brothers and another sister, filling the expanded cabin with laughter and activity. Preston's cattle operation became one of the most successful in the territory, known for the quality of its stock and the fairness of its dealings. Olivia never heard from her father again, though rumors reached them occasionally that Thomas Montgomery had lost the last of his holdings to Harold Blackman, who had eventually married a widow from Austin. The past seemed like another life, one that faded into insignificance compared to the richness of the present. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston took Olivia for a ride to the highest point on their property, a mesa overlooking the entire valley. Below them, their ranch spread out in all directions, fields of grass where cattle grazed, the expanded barn and corrals, the main house that had grown from a simple cabin to a comfortable home, and the smaller houses where their ranch hands lived with their own families. "I never dreamed we could build all this," Olivia said, taking in the vista before them. Their eldest daughter was engaged to be married. Their sons were learning the ranch business from their father, and their youngest daughter showed a talent for teaching that would soon take her to college back east. "I did," Preston replied, his arm around her waist just as it had been that first day when he had shown her the valley. His hair was streaked with silver now, lines of experience marking his face, but his eyes still held the same devotion when they looked at her. "From the moment I first kissed you behind your father's stables, I knew what we could create together." Olivia turned in his embrace, her hands framing his beloved face. 20 years had only deepened her love for this man who had risked everything to save her, who had built a life with her based on respect and partnership rather than ownership. "I'm grateful every day that you rode into that church," she told him. "That you were brave enough to take me from their hands and show me what real love could be." Preston's kiss was as passionate as it had been on that first night beneath the Texas stars, a testament to a love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. As they rode back to their home, side by side as they had always been. Olivia knew with absolute certainty that the frightened bride who had been dragged to the altar all those years ago had found something far more precious than security or status. She had found true love with her courageous cowboy, a love that would endure for all their days and beyond.